What if philosophy was never meant to be just an academic discipline? What if it always was an initiation, a way of life, a rebellion against the comfortable lie that you already know what and who you are? Today I'm sitting down with Dr. Danielle Layne, professor of philosophy at Gonzaga University, director of the graduate philosophy program, and founder and CEO of Palinode Productions, a philosophical technology collective building innovative courses, creative events, and media rooted in what it means to be human. She's also behind Khora, an open-sourced philosophical search engine and social platform powered by machine learning, designed to connect ideas, challenge perspectives, and personalize your own journey through the history of thought. She teaches philosophy, human nature, Platonic mysticism, philosophy as a therapy, and classical critiques of democracy, as well as much, much more. And she has spent her career doing the one thing academic philosophy tends to punish, bringing the mystery and meaning back into it. In this conversation, we move through the full arc of things, the passion of Eros, from the Orphic roots of Western thought to the pre-Socratics and what Heraclitus and Parmenides were actually doing, to Plato as the philosopher who gathered those threads together and wove them into something that has never truly stopped mattering, to Socrates as a half-foreign outsider whose wisdom the establishment just could not stand. We talk about philosophy as rebellion, ignorance as a door rather than a deficit, and why the mystery traditions were never separate from Platonic philosophy. They were its source. And, of course, you know, this is who we are, Magus in the media. And if this conversation opens something in you, please share it with someone else who needs it. Like and subscribe if you want more of this. And let's begin. Welcome back to Magus in the Media, and today I'm getting to do something that I've wanted to do since the beginning of my channel, and that is to speak to a fellow philosopher. This is such a fascinating time that we live in, and nothing is more needed than the art of philosophy, that first principle, that which helps brings us back to ourselves. And Danielle Layne is going to be the one to help break us into that. She is a PhD professor at Gonzaga. She's also, correct me if I'm wrong, the director of philosophy of the graduate program, as well as the CEO and director of Palinode Productions, which we're going to get into. Not only that, it seems to me that she is enlightened with the spark of Eros and that passion that true philosophy needs. Thank you for coming and joining me today, Danielle. How are you?
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's truly my honor. So I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, I do too. Beautiful. So first off, did I get all that right? You're a professor at Gonzaga?
That's right. Yeah, no. Teach classes like human nature, classical critics of democracy, philosophy of sex and gender, philosophy as a form of therapy, Plato, last semester, Platonic mysticism, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Beautiful. And then you also started a new project, which we'll talk about later, which is called Palinode Productions, right?
Yes. Right. No, and this is a company centered around bringing philosophy out of the ivory tower and here in your living room so that people can remember that philosophy is a way of life primarily and that we all do it, particularly in the middle of the night when we wonder what meaning is. So.
Well, that's beautiful. And there's nothing more meaningful than trying to understand whatever this love of wisdom is. And I think that's a great place to start. Can you give me your understanding on this massive topic? To you, what is philosophy?
Wow. Well, of course, you just said it is the love of wisdom. Sophia being wisdom and philo being to love. And I tend to go with Nietzsche on this one. So Nietzsche was a classical philologist in his initial stages of being a researcher and a philosopher. And in his early work, he did an etymology of philosophy that I gravitate towards, which we know that Sophia means wisdom, but it also is etymologically linked to the verb to taste, right? And to have a certain kind of taste. So that philosophy is a kind of gravitation toward a beautiful taste, a kind of an aesthetic. And I would argue that it's part of creating and manifesting, if you will, beauty in the world via the activity of either recognizing or establishing or reimagining what the world is. And that we as human beings have that power to do that all of the time. And so that philosophy helps us live a certain way of life because it creates a certain way of life and sustains a certain way of life. And if you are happy with the mundane 9 to 5, there is no meaning, I'm just a bag of mostly water, then yeah, fine. But most people crave something more, desire something more, and they don't have the tools or access to understanding that there's been thousands of years of people creating methodologies and stories and narratives and ways of life through dialogue and community and institutions and churches, so on and so forth, or martial arts, things like this, that actually are part of this history and tradition of creating meaning for and with others. So.
That's beautiful. And that seems to give it a little more ability for the normal everyday individual to do this said ivory tower style of philosophizing that the academics are seeming to take over, because it seems to be for everyone. Historically, when do you believe philosophy first began?
Oh, goodness. I believe it began, prehistoric, like there's, I've got my theories about the fact that we think about something like the poem of Parmenides. And in the poem of Parmenides, we have Parmenides as an initiate into a dream incubation cult that's run by women priestesses who are creating this atmosphere of these turning wheels and this kind of music and these chariots and these horses and going deep into the cave or opening the gates. And I think these mystery traditions have a very long history that wouldn't have been written down because that would have been to profane the mysteries. So that long before we started writing down all these ideas about what being is within mythological terms or in aphorisms for Heraclitus or purification rituals for Empedocles, that women and people within various different mystery traditions had been passing the torch of how it is that we can remind people we're intimate with, and that's be initiate is to be intimate, to be kin, to be close. And yes, sometimes that revolved around erotic mysteries, because who better to get you out of thinking about the mundaneness of life than the woman sitting next to you whispering, "What do you think life is?" So
yeah, that's beautiful.
I believe it began there. And so.
Yeah, no, I like that. And that question of then what is philosophy and then where do you think it began is such a differentiation to what the mainstream idea of how philosophy began is, and also what academic philosophy is. So most people will think that philosophy is some stale thing, analytic philosophy that must break down massive universals into its smallest minute detail. But what you seem to be telling me is something slightly different. Is that true?
Oh, of course. I think that that's part of the gatekeeping problem of philosophy or the academic discipline of philosophy, is that it tries to, again, to appeal to Nietzsche, it tries to turn philosophy into a discipline about nut cracking. I got this little nut here and I'm going to break it open for no apparent reason. Or as I often say, turning certain ideas into little figurines and putting them in your glass menagerie and saying, hey, I discovered this. I'm the only person who could teach you about what this means. You need me as a mediator. And philosophy was never about the sage on the stage. It was about a sage that gives you the kind of access in, right? So that you could start doing it yourself in your own unique way. So that in my classes, I often have students, they don't write papers or take tests very often. I have them do what's called Socratic Dialogue Day, where I'm like, hey, create your memes, create your songs, go out and record a TikTok like video to show me that you have read, because I know that what really matters is not how I interpret it, but how you interpret it. And today we live in a visual culture where kids are showing more and more adeptness at expressing their understanding and their engagement through these visual mediums. And so what is it that we're doing when we say you have to write an essay and you have to write it in the high English style with all of the various different rules, when all that does is tell that young person with dyslexia that they're an idiot? And it's like, no, you just have a different way in than other people, and we've got to find ways to make that fun and exciting and real, because that is what philosophers in antiquity, at least, and in the Renaissance knew, is that, look, this guy over there, he's not interested in writing a magnum opus about the meaning of human dignity, but he can paint. Look at what he did on that ceiling. And so let's remember that philosophy is not just an academic discipline about writing and making arguments. It is, as I said, a few minutes ago, about creating beauty in this world. Because when we create beauty, we remind human beings of their infinite potential to recreate beauty. That they too, when we stand underneath the Sistine Chapel, we say, oh, a human being did that. A human being didn't just go along with what the church wanted. They went up there and, they snuck in a picture of the brain because they knew that somebody else would see it. And the importance of how it is that we can rebel in sly and classic ways. I love the infinite creativity that gets tapped when you remember that philosophy is not academic nutcracking.
Yeah, I like that. So would you say that the authentic philosopher is an authentic rebellion, like a rebellion against that established order?
Well, of course. I often immediately know when somebody doesn't really align with what at least I think philosophy is. I don't want to be the asshole gatekeeper who says, oh, you have to be a rebel to do it. But there's something about when philosophy catches fire in you, as Plato says in the seventh letter, that you cannot help but smell the lies and the deceit that seem to be part and parcel of the everyday world that most people just accept as best practices, or, just the way things are, right? And we just got to put up with it. And there's something about philosophy that kind of refuses to be a site for tomfoolery, for sophistry, for winning arguments just because you can. Because you know what? I've got mad skills in winning arguments, right? I like, that's what philosophy helps me do, is I could sell a junk car to a person with $5. It's just one of those things. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't, because that's what the philosophical spirit says, is like, for what good are you making this argument? For what good are you creating this piece of art? There's always the telos, or purpose, that is in the heart of people who recognize the value of a certain way of life. And so, at the end of the day, the rebel, you cannot help but become a rebel if you're a philosopher, because the hoi polloi, or the masses, kind of demand a complacency that philosophy just can't put up with. And so
that's a beautiful answer. I love that. And so then for you, I was listening to one of your conversations you had on a different podcast, and it was, you were first interesting enough, you were into theater. Mm-hmm. And from the theater programs that you were in, you actually realized that, was it you took a philosophy course, or you had the story about your boyfriend where you're like, I think I'm gonna do philosophy, and he
poor guy,
he never watches my stuff. Smart enough to be able to be a philosopher. Funny enough, I think that's the beginning phrase of Socrates, is that I know that I know nothing. And that's kind of, even though you didn't say that, you took it as a test of your own skills, and you're all like, well, maybe I don't know anything, but I think that's the purpose of why I have this spark to want to. You just gave me that Promethean fire to move forward. And is there something to that for your philosophy journey?
That is so on point, because what that young man did was he tapped in to my rebellious, like, no, I can do anything. So I might be a ditz right now. I might just be a silly little actress right now. Oh, but I can sense that there's something in this text. I can sense, even though I still don't understand, even though I didn't take an entire class on metaphysics, I remember saying to them that, oh, wait, I still don't know what metaphysics is. And of course, like to this day, like metaphysics is a nebulous term. But I didn't know that at 18 years old. I thought maybe I'd just been a dum-dum taking a class for a semester and still hadn't figured out the very topic. But the point is that you're right. It was this, but recognize my ignorance, because look, there's got to be something to that. Like most people won't say, I don't know. And maybe there's something. And so I ended up eventually writing my dissertation on the value of Socratic ignorance and the recognition of ignorance, because I was surrounded by people who refused to say, I don't know. And that just struck me as the most hypocritical thing, that if you're in philosophy, that should come naturally to you. Yes. That's the very wisdom of the so-called father of Western philosophy, at least. And if you can't really explore how it is that when you say, I don't know, you've given yourself a whole new terrain to investigate. Like, it's like as if Middle Earth is opened up. And now I get to make a new map, right? And so, yeah, that's what happens when you say, I don't know. It's not, a lack. It's an expanse that you haven't yet checked.
Nice. And then, so when you started your philosophical courses, what was that first course that really made it be like, okay, I feel like I'm doing what I should be?
Okay, so it wasn't in my BA. So in my BA, I was working so much because that's what you have to do when you're young, and I was attending bar, and so I was one of those students that could phone it in and do well. But I knew I liked it, right? And I knew that there was something to it. I mean, I remember once I was bartending, and it was great because my logic course had prepared me to have arguments with the bros who would come into the bar, and I'd be able to, flip their initial impression of what I was via having the skills to argue and turn conversations in another direction. But at the time, I would have, if little Danny had the ability to have the angel and the devil come out and say, I was like, I'm doing it to win, right? I'm not doing it for the love of wisdom yet. The love of wisdom, I think, was truly born in me when I was working on my master's degree and having the same kind of characters that were like that boyfriend that I told you about, that, just treated me like, oh, little woman, and more little white trash woman, marginal, as they would say in Belgium. And so again, that fire was lit again. And I would sit in the stacks of the Louvre Library, which is one of the most amazing libraries of all time. And I just would devour book after book, and I'd wake up hungry to get to the library again. And that's when I knew it had been born in me, is that I just was super excited to read and think and to not understand all the time, and to find the quotes that reminded me of my own journey and who it is that I am, and what it means to be somebody who is often discounted, and to know in your heart of hearts that every soul that ever has existed has an infinite plenitude of possibilities. And oh my goodness, these are the books that are helping me realize that. What if, more people understood that if you just sit in the stacks of a library, which I think is one of the coolest things if you think about it. I now argue these days that books are living entities, that somebody poured their soul into a text, and then thousands of scribes, over years and centuries, have made it possible for those books to be there, whispering their secrets, that we don't need the psychologist or the doctor to tell us how to heal. I mean, we do for some things, but not all the things that constitute the human condition of suffering and despair and anxiety. That, go open up Kierkegaard and he can whisper you to the secrets of the value of fear and trembling, the value of anxiety, or Sartre and the value of despair, how these things actually give us signposts to, this universal ideas that we all experience. experience. I might not experience suffering exactly the way you do, but I now have a better way into understanding how even the most happy looking souls, even your most Robin Williams like souls, even your most Aristophanic souls have that deep brokenness in them too. And that's why we can recognize the value of empathy and being with others. So.
That's beautiful. So then what, and I completely agree. I am a bibliophile myself. I love libraries. I love that you call them the stacks, especially because in a lot of I'm a huge Patrick Rothfuss fan, even though he hasn't written the third book of Doors of Stone. I still think those first two books are fantastic. And it's one of those things where it's like these characters like Kvothe, or these characters like Hermione, or any of these nerds that we kind of mimic ourselves off of as we're roaming through and carrying these books. And I myself am continually reading 4 or 5 books at once as you're trying to take in as much information. And people are like, well, how can you take in all that information? And the only answer is that I love the love of wisdom. And that is why that philosophical disposition is more than just trying to analyze things into obscurity and to try to figure things out, because the idea that the figuring out is only a metaphor for a lack of language in a world that I'm trying to become embodied in. And so I'm trying to personally myself with my work is trying to, as Heidegger did, trying to merge the gap of the Cartesian Enlightenment period, which I believe gave us a lot of beautiful things, but at the same time also took away the embodied experience of the ancient philosophers, I truly believe. And so that's kind of my own thing. But the idea is then what was, for myself, I'll tell you, once you tell me yours, what was one of the first philosophical texts that you read that actually was like mind blowing for you?
Thus spoke Zarathustra. So
Nice.
I actually read parts of it for the first time in high school. There was a art professor, I believe his name was Professor Tripp, and it actually got me writing poetry for the first time because I realized, well, if this guy can do it, and it makes no sense in some such fashion, maybe I can too. And so, yeah, that spoke Zarathustra. And then the second one would be the Symposium. So 2 texts that are dear to my heart. Then, yeah, it would have been all of Nietzsche's early works. So I weirdly thought when I was a BA that Plato was baby philosophy. I read it like... my professors could see that I, gravitated to Platonism, but I kept avoiding becoming a Platonist because I thought this silly thing that since it came first, it must be early baby philosophy. Little did I know. In any case, this led me to kind of try to avoid my real love, so to speak, which is Platonism. And I went down the Nietzschean rabbit hole for years and years and years. I wrote my master's thesis on Nietzsche's early works. And so, but yeah, eventually that led me to the pre-Socratics and back into the work. So I take that back. I fell in love with the pre-Socratics in my BA because I can remember teaching my first class as a TA, and the professor had asked me to teach as much of the pre-Socratics as possible. And so I basically just went through a whirlwind of falling in love with the pre-Socratics. And I remember teaching Heraclitus, and I said this really crazy thing, which was Heraclitus, ooh, Mufasa. Because I associated like this fire, this spirit of the logos with, something like this rebellious, outcast that comes back and saves the day as part and parcel of what it means to do philosophy. So yeah, I guess in my master's thesis, I was trying to combine my love of the ancient world with Nietzsche, which, if you know this philosopher, you know that that's what he was too. He was a classicist. Primarily, he would love the ancient world. He loved the occult. He loved the esoteric. And so looking back on it, I guess, yikes, 26 years later, 26 years later, I can see that I must have been trying to marry my 2 loves. And so,
Yeah, that's fascinating. Nietzsche. Yeah, I think we all go through our Nietzschean phase when as kids before we realize what the actual meaning of God being dead is, something that has been hijacked
Yeah.
by a lot of individuals, and it's really important to go and read that actual work so we understand that you are the one who killed them. It is not this some random God dying, but that in then doing so we must bring meaning back into our life. We have the ability to do so. Thus, in your own world, you and I did this in my own as well. I had to reestablish what meaning meant for me. And interesting enough, it goes back into the pre-Socratic to the Platonic thinkers, Socrates, all the way, even Aristotle. So for me, when I first read, interesting enough, I took my introduction. I started off my collegiate, my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And the reason was, interesting enough, that I was brainwashed by the military industrial complex when I was in my teenage years because I really liked detective slash FBI slash CIA slash like all these movies that framed this hero like journey character, the Joseph Campbell character, who goes out, figures out a bunch of stuff, collects all this data, finds the magic, does the thing. Da Vinci Code was going on at that time frame, Harry Potter, as well as everything else comic book like I have ever read. And I'm like, well, then obviously I should go become a CIA FBI agent. Little did I know, 20 years later, I'd be like admonishing and trying to show that those people don't know anything. They're all compartmentalized pawns on a scheme. And so interesting enough, for myself, it was my first cannabis use that helped break me out of that thing where I wanted to do that. And then I had to go on my own journey to then come back to actually starting my philosophical journey. That's what I then graduated college with. And Aristotle's metaphysics and physics, his Nicomachean ethics was actually the first thing that when I read it, I was all like, wow, okay, I get this. Interesting enough, I understand everything that's going on. Obviously, I didn't understand it all, but it was something that understanding as it spoke to my soul. And upon speaking to my soul, then you pick up, again, my then very similar to yours, picked up Nietzsche, and I was all like, okay, this is way better than everything else because this guy is ripping apart all of philosophy as we know it and leaving us at this abyss, this edge. And for me, I then got into Kierkegaard, the existentialists, fell into Heidegger. And from Heidegger, I went all the way back to Plato and Parmenides, Heraclitus. I wrote papers on Heraclitus. And I was all like, okay, this Platonism, there's something to that. Because Heidegger, this guy was trying to marry the Cartesian breakup of the subject-object, was trying to bring it back together. And upon bringing it back together, that leads us back to ancient philosophy. Mm-hmm. And so now you are an ancient philosophy professor, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a really good idea to bring us along because we get to the mythological age of Homer and his Iliad and the Odyssey and all of the mythoses that were going on. And then all of a sudden we get the pre-Socratics. And I don't think most people really understand why this time frame was so important to get into the pre-Socratic philosophers, then into Parmenides, Heraclitus, and then all of a sudden you get Socrates. So can you give us a little understanding of why that time frame is so important and how we then get to pre-Socratic philosophy?
Yeah, of course. First, I want to comment on your figuring things out and the what is the Dan Brown, Umberto Eco, Foucault's pendulum kind of yes. world where in which, you want to figure out the mysteries. Because I too, one of my first loves in literature was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, and I always thought that they were simple mysteries and sometimes red herrings and all that stuff. There's something to the detective, novel that really helps you realize one of the methodological tools of what it means to be a philosopher. It means not figuring it out, but waiting so you're gathering and amassing. The reason why I have 18 books in my backpack too, so everybody's always commenting, like when I go on a one weekend trip, like, why did you need to bring 10 books, Danny? And I'm like, well, I don't know where the mysteries are going to lead me this weekend. So I need to have them all here, because it's possible that if I read this, then it's going to make me want to read that. And, and it's more like what you see in a detective story where they're putting the pins together, not for the sake of figuring out, but for the sake sake of becoming receptive to the epiphany, to the moment of revelation, and there's a weird sense in which you didn't figure it out. You just followed the breadcrumbs where they led. And,
Yes.
And then you find yourself home, in an abode, as Heidegger would say, in a surrounding, in a context where things make sense. Not everything, right? And a good mystery is never completely solved, right? That's why, a good mystery always ends on another cliffhanger for another mystery to start, right? And I want to use that language of mystery too, because mystery, that brings us to the question you actually asked, is during this time period, we have all these people scattered all over the Mediterranean, and people often tend to think of Western philosophy as hegemonic, as this one cultural appearance of, suddenly we're all reasoners now. Suddenly we're all rejecting myth and we're turning to logos. That's the standard stock story that the pre-Socratics really represent this turn away from mythos and having these childlike conceptions of gods and deities, as Zeus getting angry and starting wars or supporting one or the other side of a camp. But rather, if you look at something like Homer and you look at the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides and texts outside of the canon, regarding the histories of Egypt and Mesopotamia and all the various different regions that also constitute the Mediterranean world of that time, you start to see that there's this great love of the more than, of the infinitely possible, and that we start getting certain tools that allow us to preserve that, i.e. writing, which means that we get, philosophers who are priests or priestesses within mystery traditions. They're being attacked and run out of cities, and so starting new colonies in different parts of the Mediterranean. So Parmenides is a good example of that, where he's not indigenous to Alea, but he's part of a community that was first in the area of modern day Turkey, but for one reason or another, a bunch of people from that area said, we can't live here anymore, so let's get on a boat and take as much of our stuff and go somewhere else. And that means founding a new colony and doing the syncretic work. So what I love about the ancient Mediterranean world is that colonization did not mean kill the people who were there, kill the Etruscans. You might have wars, you might have problems, but part of solving that was being syncretic, learning to say, I call this goddess Artemis, but you called her Inanna. But here we'll call her Artemis still, and you can, when I'm on your land, I'll call her Inanna. So that's part of, what it meant to be these wandering. This is why wandering and plane is so important for the philosophical mind, is because that's what philosophers were doing. They were moving. This is one of the things that Heraclitus was annoyed by. He's like, oh, look at all those wandering philosophers. I'm going to stay here in my Ephesus because this is where Artemis really is, because he dedicated his peripheusis to Artemis and her temple, because this is it. Philosophy was a kind of spiritual, reverential activity.
Yes.
People say that the turn in the pre-Socratic world was a turn away from the divine. But then I know immediately they haven't been reading their Empedocles or their Parmenides or their Heraclitus, because it's clear that they think that what they're doing is divine work, and not divine work of agreement. So often we tend to think that, if you're part of a tradition, you have to agree on certain things, and you can't, undercut or be critical, because Heraclitus was super critical of Pythagoras and Parmenides. Yeah. Why? Not because he thought that they were actually bad. It's because part of what it means to be a philosopher is to show people that each person is going to have a different perspective and a different way of understanding and hearing the logos of visions and epiphanies. And so what we need to do is remind people that there isn't just one. There isn't just Heraclitus, there isn't just Parmenides, there's just Empedocles, right? No, we can give birth to a Socrates, so to speak, and Socrates can inspire a Plato, and then thousands of years later, Derrida can say that, Plato's behind Socrates, and, and start to make sexual jokes a la Deleuze, right? Because, and that's also true. Nietzsche was obsessed with the problem of the academic nihilistic form of philosophy and history, that they had become dead disciplines that didn't,
Yes.
just like God, right? That they weren't doing anything for the human spirit anymore. And so, of course, he had to criticize the academic account of Plato and Socrates and what academics had done to it, a la Christianity. They had killed their own God with the weapons of, a banal, frankly stupid form of Platonism. And so, of course, he had to rage against Plato and Socrates, because that was part of getting people to wake up and be like, oh, wait, I have been sheepishly just accepting this dualism. I've sheepishly been rejecting life, and I had no idea that I was just praying for another world when, wait, I'm squandering this world when I do that kind of thing. And that comes from a bastard account of Plato, and that means I better do some reading of ancient texts. I didn't know that would have to be part of my life, and that's what good philosophers do, is that they can see that philosophy is not a tradition of homeostasis, of staying the same, and that it has to be preserved in exactly the right way. We should preserve the text, because that's part of taking care, as Gloria and Zaldua, of bathing our ancestors and showing reverence for the fact that they inspired us to be who we are. And so it's not there's a really good place for the good antiquarian philosopher, the kind of philosopher that knows to collect and preserve and to do that scribal work, because that part of the task of being within this tradition is to care for the dead, because the dead are not dead. They are ever living and ever being reborn in our spirits. And so
yeah, that's beautiful. And interesting enough, somebody, what is it, Elgis Uzneziv, I can never say his name, but he wrote how philosophy is a philosophy of the tomb. And so it's interesting enough that, like, that idea of the dead and dying, philosophy is that of looking towards our own death process, because that is something we're preparing for. And I think that's really important, because can we truly live if we don't understand that we will all die? And that goes back to Heidegger's idea of looking upon the horizon, that we are looking towards our own death, because that is the transformational period of all things. All things must rise and all things must fall. And so that's beautiful.
I mean, it's explicit, the theme of the Phaedo, right? So that Socrates says, I know you guys are going to laugh at this, but philosophy is a practice toward death. And what that really means is a whole lot. I can go on for forever about how the Phaedo really is one of the best texts for teaching you not to fear death. And there's no reason to fear death. And that this rebellious spirit comes from a kind of courage that doesn't come from its opposite. It is not, a courage. So my mantra when I was younger was, I'm afraid, but I'm not a coward. And so that would be part of like how I would constantly push myself to do certain things. But the internalization of the value of what death is and thinking about death can allow for us to understand that there is nothing to fear. Right? That the only thing I know to be bad, as Socrates would say, is ignorance, but not ignorance that you're not, like ignorance of your ignorance is the thing that will stop you from, pursuing knowledge. Once you recognize your ignorance, you have a task. You have to pursue knowledge, even if you don't get absolute knowledge. And when you realize that that is the good life and that you've spent your life actually living, then you can have a free death, right? You can have one of those deaths where you're like, here comes the bus. And you're like, okay, I lived. I know I put my guts into everything. I know I lived the kind of life to where my children will hear me whisper words of wisdom, right? Or that students or that people will have a sense of the value of being impassioned and to truly live in such a way that that you're going to be guiding people even after you're long gone. Because that's basically what Socrates says at the very end of the Phaedo. He says, look, let me tell you a myth about what's going to happen to me after death. Basically, I'll become a good guide, a good daimon, right? And then eventually, if I'm lucky, maybe, more than that, basically hinting at becoming homotheosis, becoming most like a god as far as possible. And this is the tradition. So we often forget that the names Iphigenia and Artemis and Diana and Atlantis, all of these come from real women and men, right? Who were priests and priestesses that inspired people in such a way that they became guides. They embodied the divine in such a way that we could not help. Right. And so we started writing stories, maybe even false stories, myths about all the crazy deeds that they did. Right. But why did you do that? Well, it's the same reason why C.S. Lewis makes the Christ or God figure a lion, Aslan. Right. It's because it's part of showing that we can turn things upside down. We can make a world of fairies and ice queens, and it communicates something of the divinity of this world and the power of this world when we do something like write new poems of the divine, that when we write something like Zarathustra and we're killing God, or at least pointing the mirror of killing God, so that we can remember that we can create Ubermentian individuals, right? We can remember that there's the possibility that you too, will live forever as we pass on traditions and honor, Timos, right? Honor the ones that are within our hearts, the ones that help us be, as Socrates defines the soul in the Phaedrus, self-animated. And why would you ever fear that ending when you know that it's an eternal, ever vibrant resource, and that yes, maybe this mortal coil of a body will die. Hey, Loki, but the spirit remains.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful because it completely it connects into exactly what we're talking about, from the mythological periods of Homer and everything that was going on into the pre-Socratics. And what I mean by that, and you obviously know this, and I want you to go deep on this one, is that Homer in his Odyssey and the Iliad was passing along mystery school traditions through time, through the oral tradition, moving it into the writing traditions that we get with Plato writing down the dialogues. And so even before we get the pre-Socratic philosophers, what we get is the Orphic traditions, and you get the Pythagorean traditions, both doing different things, but trying to move along the mystery of what it means to live in the world and understand the great cosmogenic cycle of the celestial movement of the stars and how it embodies an experience and forces into the human person as they move along the planet. And that is those traditions are the direct traditions that Plato then was writing about in his dialogues. And so can you give us a nice little segue from the pre-Socratics into Socratic traditions?
Oh goodness. Well, I thought we were going to go the Orphic route. So I was just in my head, I was like, ooh, yeah. Orphism.
Hit it. I love it. Let's hit the Orphic into that. Let's start there.
Orphism for me is the best way into Platonic mysticism and understanding one of Platonisms, all the way from Plato to the Neoplatonists like Iamblichus and Proclus. This is they called Orpheus the Hierophant, right? Because he had gone farther than the philosophic. He had leaped into this poetic that we can see liminally, right? That the songs that Orpheus sings, or the poet sings, or Milton sings, that they, unlike the philosopher who, is giving the theory of things. These are the people
which happens when Aristotle starts writing. He's the first one who starts to kind of write down his theorems in that way before, like after Plato, right?
Yeah, and you probably, if you know anything about my particular philosophy, is that I love Aristotle, so please don't get mad at me, guy. But he is the first person that wants to be the center of attention. He's your kind of first Hegelian type figure, so that all the pre-Socratics, everything he tells you about the pre-Socratics, you have to have that little red flag of distrust, because he's really positioning himself as the pinnacle. He's the one who solved it. I mean, there's a reason why Plato has Aristotle as a figure. So it's not actually Aristotle in the Parmenides; it's a young Aristotle. But it's it kind of hat tip to the fact that there's been this person in the academy for almost 30 years not getting it and asking all sorts of things that make it clear to Plato that you have a naive conception of the problems having to do with forms. You think it's, you think that there's a problem of participation when that is not my bag, baby. Plato would thought that the problem of participation was a moot question, but he wrote the Parmenides in order to respond to the criticisms that the student Aristotle had, and criticisms that come from trying to think that you're the center, you're the one who has it all figured out. I mean, that is the first main error of any philosopher. When I read a philosopher and open up a text and get that weird vibe that they are the piece de resistance, they were the missing
Hegel?
piece.
Hegel does that to me. Makes me want to ram my head through a wall.
So it's funny because that's my intuition with him as well. I have that same intuition with Heidegger, but like with that uncle that we all are annoyed by because they're a kind of salty codger or curmudgeon type. There's also something endearing about that. And so I cannot help but love that's one of the reasons why I said, oh, I love you, is because there is something valuable about having those kind of characters come on the scene, because they become so influential. And I can't tell you, it is so much easier to teach Aristotle than it is to teach Plato, because Aristotle is so methodical. And you're right, the Nicomachean Ethics, even though all of that is already in a book like The Republic, it is. Aristotle does a great job of just laying it out. Of course, he takes credit for it, which is annoying. But at the end of the day, he does a really great job of showing the value of telos, the value of virtue as an activity of the soul, so on and so forth. Okay, so going back to Orphism as one of those through lines that keeps coming back. Well, it's this myth of what Nietzsche was also obsessed with, of the god dismembered, right? That we have, a story of love and loss. So Orpheus, bitten, his love Eurydice, which name means good justice or broad justice. He's in love, right? And he's the new it boy in the poetic, theosophic world, and everybody's listening to his songs. And remember, from Thrace, right? Which is where most Athenians got their slaves, right? And so, a region of Greece that is highly oppressed or dismissed or not regarded as worthy of rational polises or poli. Anyways, and the point is that, surrounded, trying to do their best to make their own culture, this own beauty. And his wife dies, being bitten by a snake. And again, snakes have this really wonderful long history, both bad and good. And Eurydice is cast to the underworld, and Orpheus, does what a good philosopher, musician, poet does, which is take the risk of going down into the underworld, doing the impossible. Again, the impossible, like Odysseus goes down into the underworld, and again goes down in the underworld and receives the wisdom not just of Tiresias but of women, all these dead mothers and wives who must communicate to this outside world. Odysseus is transformed by that. Anyways, Orpheus goes down, and Persephone is so moved by his songs that she says okay, and all he has to do is obey one little rule, which is don't look back. Wait till your lady love is also out. And poor guy, I'm writing a short story right now where he does it on purpose because he's afraid to be with a woman for forever. But in the midst, a woman forever. Oh God, I'm gonna have to ask questions and respond to questions for forever. In any case, but in the more standard canonical ones, he does it because he's just anticipating. He's so excited that he accidentally looks back. And he loses his wife. But then comes back with this song, right, that will capture the attention of so many different cultures and people. Of Zeus is ready to give the cosmos and the world to his son, right? This new bouncing baby boy called Dionysus, who And so Hera's not very pleased by this, apparently, neither the Titans. And so the Titans and Hera tease the baby Dionysus out of his temple because there he's safe with two things, the mirror and a rattle, right? And so that here's this story about the human condition and the godliness that is born in us, right? Like keeping it in our temple, it's safe, right? Ooh, but what are we tempted by? How do we decide to leave our safe abode of ourselves in the sacred? Well, one of it is a plaything, something that brings pleasure, right? Dopamine. And the other is our own reflection, the side of ourselves, right? Because we get entranced like Narcissus, right? Ooh, what is this thing? And this is one of the reasons why AI is so fascinating, is because it is a kind of mirror of our own psyches and souls. And so we're entranced to go down this rabbit hole that means reflective surfaces because we're in love with ourselves, which again is not wholly bad. It's just when you get caught in this mirror. And so Dionysus is torn to shreds, limb by limb, by the Titans because of this. And luckily Athena sees it happen and runs to Daddy Zeus, and Zeus comes and throws his lightning bolt. Everything is ash, right? And he grabs the heart of Dionysus and puts it in his thigh, and then he makes human beings from these ashes, right? Where in which it means that we have a titanic or chthonic aspect, right? This earthly thing that wants to tear things apart and destroy and make things multiple and all sorts of confusing and scattered. But then we also have this Dionysian part in us, and this is that light. This is because the other part of the story is the story of Phanes and his birth from Metis and this cosmic egg, and so that Dionysus is an inheritor of the Phanic or light tradition, and that we have this light in our soul, and what we need to do, as Socrates suggests in the Cratylus, is to see ourselves like an oyster shell with a kind of pearl inside, and so that is the activity of being human, is to discover that pearl of wisdom within.
That's beautiful. And then even bringing up the idea of Phanes brings me to the Peter Mark Adams and his rites and rituals of the Mithraic tradition. And so it's really fascinating how what we're throughout all my work and what you're getting at through everything you're talking about, and I think you agree with this, is that there seems to be, even if it's not a perennial thing, there seems to be something that's talked about through all traditions, this through line, this golden thread, as Jocelyn Godwin talks about in his writings. But Peter Mark Adams specifically is talking and writing about it, that you can, from the Mithraic traditions that happened in Rome in that time frame, the same slaying of the bull that Mithras does goes all the way back to the Orphic traditions, and that same slaying of the bull and the being born from the egg. You can find these traditions that stem all the way through line to, he's finding it to 8,000 years BC.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
And not only is he doing that, but Dr. Heather Lynn, in her own renegade archaeology that she does, I've spoken to her, and she's saying that she can find it pre-13,000 years BC written in the archaeology, and understanding that these are a star cult. This is a stellar religion that is moving itself through and has then taken different names through different times. And I think, as you're saying, we're finding it in the Orphic traditions. We're seeing it in, obviously, the Pythagorean mystery cults in that time frame, as he's mapping the stars using sound and music and the harmony of the spheres, very similar to the lyre that then Orpheus is using to write his poetry. And then what happens is, and I think you're completely right, and this is something that I'm continually pushing back on the more myopic philosophers and academics, is that they're trying to state, then there's a hard line where all of a sudden the pre-Socratics come along and the seven sages, and it's like, now mythology is dead and that's stupid and there's no truth there, and now we need to move into trying to figure out the cosmogenic cycle and cosmology, that it's either ether, water, air, fire, and that is the original element of all things. And I think that's a massive confusion of what these pre-Socratics were doing, right?
100%. And it's a massive confusion that philosophy has been a history of rationalization and secularization, like that is only in the last 200 years. So when we project that onto the ancient world, we do the ancient world a gross disservice, because every one of the thinkers, even Epicurus, right? So Epicurus or Epicureanism is supposedly an atheistic, and it's like, no, they're not atheistic. No. It's just that the gods aren't concerned with us.
Have that term at that time frame. It's like to put the term atheism onto these people is showing whoever says those things, which I hear it myself too, your ignorance. And it blows my mind. It's like you haven't obviously read any of these texts, and you're using some kind of relativism to put on your idea of what they thought, instead of having the hermeneutics and understanding that that not all things can be translated in any way we want, which you can do, but actually there's an authentic level of translation, as Gadamer would state, that we really need to tap into that worldview at that time frame to see it from their angle. Thus, we can have a better understanding of exactly how they were trying to understand the world.
I mean, to kind of cast light on things, because I want to get back to your 13,000 and 8,000, so don't let me forget, because I find that fascinating. But I also want to think about the fact that one of the reasons why I feel like philosophy, and it's easy to tell the philosophical spirit from the sophistic spirit, is that the philosophical spirit is always kind of trying to go over the human spirit of meaninglessness. So that when you look at ancient Athens, one of the reasons why Socrates and Plato do what they do, right, is because they see the problem of a culture that says, oh yeah, we have all these stories about the gods, but they're not important. Or like Alcibiades, I'm going to appeal to the mother of all gods in order to seduce the masses into making me a tyrant, right? And so people who either are like, I don't know, I'm just going to go along with the cult religions because that's just what I have to do to survive, or people who manipulate divine, spiritual, mysterious things in order to get a following, like Alcibiades did or Heraclitus did. And so that this is, and then you got your sophists, that they're sophists, right? We don't know what they actually thought, because what they're doing is trying to get the monies so that they can, travel the world and be cool. And so they're usually utilizing these kind of activities of arguing on both sides in order to, to survive themselves. Unfortunately, the problem is that what they do ends up spreading that relativism, that secularism, even though you can say, I believe in the Zeus or the Demeter, but really it's not lighting fire. Yes. And this for me is the very culture we find ourselves in now, right? Which is, and I think this is the hallmark, is that philosophy and spirituality, they really boom when we see, oh crap, my kids don't have that passion. My kids don't have that ambition. My kids can't see that when they look up at the stars, they're not just seeing little gas balls, right? They could be, as Heraclitus said, bowls, basically. Because, I love telling this to my students when I say, look, Heraclitus thought all the stars and the planets in the sky were floating bowls. And I'm like, why is that any less rational than floating balls? So please don't make fun of, the rings of fire and all these things, because when you go out into the stars and you do what Descartes said and say, hey, I'm just going to methodically doubt everything that anybody's ever told me. What can I actually get from my own spirit? Yeah, I'm going to fudge a little. I'm going to remember some other things that, people told me, because that's what Descartes did. But at the end of the day, you can have your own theories that make just as good a sense as the ones that we espouse as the right, the true, and the just. And if you don't say that they're just, as funnily enough, the Mufasa character said, I think they're gas balls. No, they move and they change, and it seems as if when the moon is at this particular time, I have a different relationship to my own body and being tapped in and in tune. And so that now I'm segueing, I guess, to the 8,000, 13,000. Yes, because if you let yourself, and this is why I feel blessed, I have a small patch of land where I can go out in the middle of the night and just lay in the grass and stare up, because that's actually what Socrates' definition of what a human being is one who stares up, right? That's his etymology in the Cratylus. And the moment you stare up, and moment cultures do, the infinite expanse before you, just like the sea or any mystery, it invites you to leap into it, right? To dance with it, to stare at it like you would your lover and make a star chart or a portrait, if you will. And this isn't, for the ancient mind, a mere hobby. It is life. We've gotten so used to work culture, right? Where something like staring at the stars is what you do to relax, versus no, this was the invitation. You woke up and you were something rather than nothing. And here I am. Am I supposed to just be a warrior for this mad king? Or
Yes.
can I appeal to him the value of creating a temple in his honor, in order that he, can be preserved? So that there are major traditions that the mummy and entombing was part of, these practices of death, right? Where certain people would achieve the immortal life via the process of preserving their bodies, or the inscriptions on walls, that they had the secrets for which pathway to take, because they, listened to their scribes who said the stars say X, Y, and Z, and so that all of those things from ancient worlds comes from a deep well. My friend Marios recently, a couple of years ago, gave a paper about how Ursa Major, right, is for the Egyptians that tool of opening the mouth in particular rituals. And why? Because it's the constellation that never dips below the horizon. It's always eternally there. And so the secret of, various different tools in art, and this is what I as a historian really want to make people understand. When you study the material objects of a culture, you're still doing philosophy. And I would say you're doing that embodied philosophy. You're holding little pots, right? As P.D. Newman has shown, with ridges on it that tell you that in this pot, don't give that one to your kid, because it's got the ayahuasca, or it's got the pharmacon. And so, it's even pots speak about what it is that we do as people who need to survive, but also embrace the more than. Sorry, I ran on too long. Thank you.
No, there's no running on too long. This is
I know.
what we're doing right now, just so you know. Okay, Danielle, this is beautiful. And I think it's such a beautiful thing because of, as Graham Hancock states, we are a civilization with amnesia, and part of waking up to our birthright is waking up to our authentic history through time. And I think we cannot speak about our history without understanding the philosophy that got us here, which is why I think there is a collective effort by secular scientific materialists or the more authoritarian style of conservative religious. And for me, both sides lead to the same thing. Both sides are myopic in their thinking. I am not Hegelian in my thinking. I do not like the dual party system. And so in my work, I will continually try to tear down that structure of how we think about things, because if we don't find harmony within our masculine and our feminine, in our structure and our chaos, without that harmony, we can never actually, I think, view the stars as they are, because they don't have a left or a right. We are only seeing them rise and fall. Down. That's what I'm saying. They don't have an up and down, a left or right. They move in, yes, they move in the cyclical nature and the spherical understanding of how we see things, but there are multiple aspects and ways of then reading these things, and there are truer and falser ways of going about them. But we know what that is when we hone our tools of observation, and that gets me into why I like the Hermetic thought, and that's just one term. The Hermetic thought being the idea of us having the ability to fine tune our nervous system so we can understand the nervous system brain interaction with reality, which then leads me to why I like phenomenology so much, because Husserl came out and said that we are always a consciousness intending ourselves upon some kind of perceived object. And if I break that down and how why that matters is because I'm never actually witnessing the object in and of itself. I'm only ever witnessing my perception of that object. And if we've learned anything, we've learned that perception is a gamble. And that comes back to understanding if we had a base framework for our nervous system to interact with the world, and that base framework that I like, one of the top ones being Platonism, is that gives us the first tool of the of hermeneutics, the first tool of the hermeneutics, the first tool of what I think is so important, and that is the ability to philosophize. And I think in the magical community of the occult, the Western esoteric tradition, or in the new agey spiritual nonsense that I can't stand, or in mainstream religions to scientific materialism, is that we are forgetting that main thing, and it's how to philosophize, which is then what I think the Republic is actually all about. It's all about how to philosophize. And anybody who tells me any different, I'm going to tell you that you didn't read it correctly and you need to understand philosophy better, but that's my own ego getting in the way. And so I want to go back into the line now of us. So Heraclitus and Parmenides are trying to talk about two things, and these are two guys after the pre-Socratic philosophers, correct? And these two, I think what they're doing...
They're pre-Socratic philosophers.
They are pre-Socratic. Thank you. And so what they're doing is one is speaking about the ever-changing thing, and one is speaking that which never changes. And so I'm also a science fiction freak, so I like Philip K. Dick a lot. And what he says in his exegesis is that he states that these two guys didn't have the understanding of what a hologram was, but if we understood that both of these two people put their philosophies together, they're talking about the holographic nature of our universe, because you must have something that doesn't move for something to be moving on top of it. And when you have that understanding, we can see how reality moves as such. So can you give me a nice through line of how then Heraclitus and Parmenides really help us understand what Plato is doing with Socrates in his dialogue?
Yeah, no problem. I'm excited. One of the things, I had a small epiphany while you were talking about the stars and the up and down that I thought would be worth sharing. Put before yourself, the image of the Orphic cosmic egg, right? And imagine yourself, right? And the human body as that egg. And what the stars are is that snake that wraps around, right? And here, like, it just keeps moving and we keep turning and we keep twisting. And this is the magical movement and activity that eventually leads to the phanes, the light god, to burst out, right? This is the androgynous, erotic god that has, 4 wings and a tail and fire and, just spreads his light through night. Nux, the goddess Nux. And before you know it, we have an Uranus or a cosmos, and then recreating that great cosmic egg and that great cosmic dance and movement of the dragon is actually what it is in Greek. And yeah, that's part of the fertilization, like the stars, and it's that wacky movement, because it's not perfectly harmonious, right? It's not, the way it looks is not just a perfect circle. It's an ellipsis and so on and so forth. Okay, so to translate that also into my answer about Heraclitus and Parmenides is that I am of the belief that Heraclitus and Parmenides are doing the same kind of work, right? Yes. I'm a Platonist who really ascribes to the sophist and the value of the sophist, that these are the giants of the pre-Socratic world. And on the surface, it seems as if Heraclitus is saying everything is becoming, and there is no sameness, right? And Parmenides on the surface is saying cosmic being is just a one, and it's static and it stays the same. There is only the way of what is. You cannot traverse the way of what is not. That is illusions and appearances and becoming. So all that changes is an illusion. And that is just the farthest, like, again, as you rightfully said, like when people, kind of reproduce just this kind of dichotomy between them and not focus on, oh, wait, they share a tradition. They're trying to speak of the same great mysteries. They're part of this Mediterranean world where people are passing on myths and images like Orpheus, and Heraclitus is sick watching people take up Orphism, but not as an actual philosophical practice, but just people who bury themselves in mud. And
I know.
like,
Yeah, and we see that same thing today, and I can't stand it. And it's in our New Agey spiritual, even in the occult traditions, this tradition of sophists and charlatans who I can't stand selling courses. It doesn't matter. Go on. There's just parts of these things that we see.
I agree. This exists in every, so you don't have to be a woo-woo Wiccan, right, to fall into this camp. You can also be a secularist, a scientist who says that this is just the way it is, and you haven't stopped to ask yourself the questions. You've just internalized the dogma and the literalness, and that happens in religion and science and history. This is part of people trying to have control. I'm a good spiritualist because I sacrifice a piece of string every Tuesday, and I'm like, okay, I guess that works for you.
Yes, but that's the same thing as the initiation traditions of the occult as well, that have like kind of gate kept thinking and initiation and all these things. And so it's a fascinating, that's
that's one of the reasons why Heraclitus makes fun of, Pythagoras and Orpheus, because they have become dogmatic, that the practitioners of Pythagoreanism had become unaware or unhearing to the logos of change. Don't just reproduce what your master said. Change it, adapt it, make sure it's a living thing, that's
the rebellious spirit of Prometheus and Lucifer, right? That's spinning through us. Nice. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I know, I love it. And so that here, Heraclitus is really trying to do the work of getting people to realize that, he says, look, when you self-knowledge is to see the infinite depths within the soul, and, like the relationship, the playfulness of a child going back and forth of this game, as he said, right? Which is one of the reasons why Nietzsche loved him, right? Like Heraclitus was his one of his greatest inspirations. And he also thought Parmenides too, also this great mind. These are the people who intuitively leap into the void and, come back with all these Orphic like poems, because remember, Heraclitus and Parmenides did not write treatises. They wrote either aphorisms that riddle, are enigmatic or enigmatic. Enigmatic not being more than the riddle. Enigmatic means something that's always a mystery, even when you think you've solved it. So that when Heraclitus says the way up and the way down are one and the same, I can have ideas about what that means. I can engage what that means, but I will never solve it or figure it out. I will never nutcrack that completely because it's an initiation. It's an invitation to play, to become like the logos that Heraclitus was listening to. And so here, Heraclitus there is a logos, right? There is something that remains, right? Even though that you never step in the same river twice. It is this oneness, this relationship. And I do like to put it in terms that are romantic, because I do think of the centrality. Yeah, that the many and the one, like they're a couple. They're in love with each other, right? And they desire each other. And there's all sorts of ways I would talk about that within the esoteric tradition of Platonism, of the one and the indefinite dyad. But we can get into that later if you would like. But in Parmenides, as I said before, if you know the research surrounding it, including people like Peter Kingsley et al., like that's an mystery tradition that he's being initiated into, or that he is a priest of himself, and he's undergoing a ritual practice of sleep incubation for a process of healing, receiving knowledge, and that he mythologically creates this world. So before he ever gets to the wisdom that the goddess speaks to him, so that's how it's framed. The goddess speaks this certain wisdom of the nature of reality and truth and being. He has to, be escorted there by these godlike women, the daughters of, I think it's Night. I believe it's Night, or maybe it's Light. I forget which one. But it doesn't matter. That he passed through both, right? So that there's all sorts of back and forth in the very opening of the poem, right? Where we get open, close, we get noise and quiet, we get gates, and all of this, all the things that are happening in the open are very sexually suggestive. So very erotic, again, if you will. So the wheels turning, these were all like codes for this kind of desire and want that typically was associated with women back in antiquity. And what the goddess tells him, right, is that there is a way of what is, right, and that it absolutely is, and it is this one, absolute kind of circle, perfect, and everything is being, so on and so forth. And most people want to travel down the way of what is not, but it's impossible, right? Like every time you try to go down the path of what is not, you cannot. So the kind of what I try to help students to understand this way of what is not and its impossible traversal is to do the thing that my kids did to me when they were little, which is, Mommy, will you spell nothing? And I'm like, okay, sweetheart. And, oh, no, you're spelling something. And it's like, oh, nuts. Like that, when we worry that death is nothingness, I love this too, right? I'm like, have you ever phenomenologically experienced nothingness?
Yes, exactly. No
No.
one has, never.
Yeah, we have no empirical evidence for anyone ever experiencing nothingness. So why do we think death is more rational to think of as pure nothingness?
It's a psyop. That's why. It's because it's something that's been ingrained into our system by this postmodern structuralist mechanistic worldview. It's nonsense. Yeah,
I mean, we have more like empirical evidence that something always remains. Like that's empirically a fact. But for some strange reason, it's more rational to think that death is pure nothingness. But I digress. So Parmenides says, look, way of what is and way of what is not. And many people try to live in this way of what is and what is not, this middle path. So kind of always going back and forth, right? This more relativistic, world of appearances, so on and so forth. But once you get the mystery, right, you understand that the way of what is, and that there is no way of what is not. You cannot traverse that at all. It means this middle path of becoming and appearances is also the way of what is. And so that here, all of this, all of the appearing being, all of the moving being, all of the change, all the stories and lies and fictions, you've brought them into being. Yeah. They are and absolutely are eternally, right? So that gives weight back to things that appear. It gives substance. It gives like, now that even this cup, participates in absolute eternal being. And we are responsible when we speak of being, that I'm not talking about this mixed way of what is and what is not. No. Everything that comes out of my mouth, I have a weight to it. That's why I have to think of the good. That's why I can't just live the sophistic life of lying and making things up just because it will get me money and an audience or whatever. No, I do it for the good of this eternal wisdom of the secret of the goddess of life, of being, who's willing to tell us this secret, to make us initiates so that we can say, oh, it's going to be a lot of responsibility defending the value of this cup. But I know I do it because I'm also defending the value of the spirit of that kid eating a sandwich in the bathroom because they're lonely and they think that they don't matter. It's like, no, kid, everything really matters, but you have to wake up to it, which is what Heraclitus was also saying. And so what I love about the relationship between Heraclitus and Parmenides is that both of them, right, inspire Plato to really care about the wisdom that came out of his own mentor, right? This wisdom of being able to, come up with great images like the Republic that are just cities in speech, as Socrates says, or the myth of the charioteer, which is about, gods in Hyper-Uranus leading us into what is beyond the stars, right? Mm-hmm. All of these fantasies, if you will, that inspired Plato to throw away his poetry and to become a philosopher poet or another kind of hierophantic character like an Orpheus with his own lyre, with his own music, with his own way of producing harmony. And that is never divorced from the activity of constant self-doubt and admitting that you're taking a risk when you do these things. Because the real problem was not the problem of participation, as Aristotle thought, right? Like, no, that was not Plato's point. The opening of the Parmenides and the dialectic that ensues lead to the conclusion that no, participation is of necessity. We are already absolutely in participation with the absolute being, even in something like mud or cup. You know, there might not be a form of mud, but mud absolutely participates with reality, with being, and that's the beauty of even something like mud. Sorry, that was mud is the example that Parmenides gives in that dialogue of the problem of forms. Is there a form of mud? And it's like, no, there doesn't have to be a form of mud, because it's still in participation with this thing called being and reality, and that we have dialectic to make sure that we practice our ability to show our ever-evolving relationship with absolute being, that becoming never is something that blips out of being, as it's emphasized in the Timaeus. That no, Khora embraces, right, in the Timaeus, all becoming like a mother, like a nurse, to make sure that nothing is ever absolutely destroyed in the temporal world, which, what a beautiful image. And in any case, the real problem for Plato was the problem we started with, right? Which is, how can you tell the difference between the liar and the real philosopher? How can you tell the difference between deceptive appearances, right? People who want to have you live in a world where there is no beauty, truth, justice, and they use the skills of philosophy and politics to convince the hoi polloi, the masses, that it's better to live a life of deceit and confusion than to follow down these paths of the mystery traditions of being and good and truth and justice and the value of women and their funny little wisdom. Because I always argue that that the Phaedrus and the Republic are all about integrating, as you said, masculine and feminine, things that are typically associated with those two things, so that the equality of the male and female ruling principles. We remember that the Callipolis, or the utopian city, is supposed to resemble, as I said, on occult rejects. Sorry, as I said there, it is in fact, right, an analogy to the soul. So when you see the equality of the male and female, it's the equality of your mythical, mysterious kind of feminine aspect. And it's also married to this more dogmatic, rational, precise. But if you tear them asunder, if you don't recognize that this so-called weak, and I love the fact that Socrates says, look, you know, they're completely equal. One is just weaker than the other. And that weakness, right, Socrates mirrors himself before he even starts talking about the three waves of paradox. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can explain the three waves of paragraph. It's so confusing. I might not be strong enough to do it. Like, he models the value of confusion, which is part of the being in harmonia with that feminine aspect. Because when you tear asunder the masculine, you know, here's philosophy and dialectic with methods, then you get your Hegels and you get your Aristotles. You get your people who think they know it all, and they think that part of being cool and important is to make other people feel small or weak, versus, no, the small and the weak, like Orpheus and Socrates. Because I also argue against, so as you were saying, these parallel problems in our contemporary society of this kind of like old academic way of teaching history of Western philosophy, but then also this movements within feminism and post-colonial and anti-racist traditions, which are amazing and good. I'm part of it, but the kind of watered down version of it, where if I teach a class that has Plato in it, I must somehow be ignorant, because don't you know, like, that's just why is this class 60% men? And I'm like, no, if you actually do the count, there's no, but also not all men are actually, so, you know, Rome is this kind of guy, and Plato, and so I argue, right?
You're doing a service. You're good luck.
I argue that, you know, Socrates is actually half foreign, and his mother was a foreign priestess who mirrored Pania in the Symposium, somebody who had to do what she had to do to survive. And so that's one of the reasons why Socrates, since he was born before 451 BC, before the law that you had to be have two parents that were Athenian citizens, that he himself, with his snub nose and his midwife mother, we always think that midwifery, it was somehow, you know, a fancy job. No, it associated you with pimping and sex work. So we get this idea of Feinarte, you know, she's of this kind of class, you know, who has to do this kind of stuff that can make Socrates look, he's possibly a foreign, or has been influenced by his foreign mother. And that's one of the reasons why we can't stand his teaching, is it's corrupting the youth. It's undermining Athenian values. And then you think about the opening apologies, like, well, I don't speak this tongue. I don't speak this. I have a foreign way of speaking. Like, he's constantly dropping the hint that he is not Athenian and that his wisdom is foreign, and that's one of the reasons why he's getting in trouble. And we just want to ignore that. Oh no, he's just another white guy in Greece. And it's like, first off, Greece is not a hegemon. So please listen to, look at your Plato, look at all the sex workers in Plato. Plato released Phaedo from being a enslaved sex worker, right? And so like when you really get into the dialogues, you can see how they can speak to the problems of what we dismiss even now, what we think is weak even now, that we can see a Gloria Anzaldúa, right? And bell hooks, and teaching to transgress, and Maria Lugones, like all of these teachers of today are actually in deep contact with this Platonic idea, like where, you know, Maria Lugones talks about the value of streetwalker theorizing, right? And finding hangouts to pass on these, you know, abilities. Like, this is the wisdom of the streets, of being able to survive, being able to put on a mask so that John doesn't kill you, and that not being because you're deceptive, but because you are clever, you are metis, you do have wisdom, because that metis, that cleverness, once you really embrace its value, transforms into wisdom. And this is why the streetwalker at 20 years old might be a ditz, but maybe in 40 years is much more than you ever thought she could be.
Yeah, that's beautiful. No, I really like that. And what you're speaking on is this idea that no matter what time frame that we are moving through, there are different masks, not only of deception, but also of survival, that we have to wear to be able to move through our normal exoteric experience as we're passing along wisdom of the esoteric. And I think that's really important to understand, because then through actually reading the dialogues themselves, going back to the ancient material and actually picking it up yourselves, and not just listening to somebody else talk about it. So everyone out there, as you're listening to my work, her work, all these things, you need to pick up these things yourself, and you have to struggle through it. And it's in that struggle that you actually learn something, because that is.
And this is part of it. Like, my friend is my enemy and my enemy is my friend. Like I want people to read an article I have and then know that I have the cojones to be able to argue right back, right? Like, please criticize. I am not afraid of your criticism. You might be right. And won't that be cool? Because then we all learn together, right? Yes. And that's the key, is that, like, I am not afraid of being challenged. Like, tell me I mispronounced something, or tell me that there's a dialogue, you know, that I've never read, and a book I've never read that I've got to write it down. Like, this is part of the amazing roller coaster that we have been given. As Diotima says in the Symposium, this is the erotic life of ever living and dying in the exact same day. But we have the resources, right, that come from poverty, right? Because if you read about Eros, like, he's shoeless, and but he's a good hunter. He's got mechane, he's got mechanisms, he's got magoi, he's got magic. All these things typically associated with problems in Athenian culture, but these are his resources for being able to overcome. And so there's all sorts of beautiful magic that we employ in order, as you said, to pass this esoteric world. And thank goodness that we don't just lock, stock, and barrel swallow what somebody else says. Like, this
Yeah.
is the problem of the secularist and the cancel culture. If you don't do it this
Yes. Thank
way,
you.
they've got the watered down version of authors like bell hooks. I mean, when
They
I
do.
see what DEI policies are saying is real inclusion, I'm like, have you read any of these women of color? They're not nary a one is asking for us to cancel anybody. Rather, they're asking people to carve bone and to cross boundaries and to make risky classrooms. That we talk about pedagogy of the oppressed, right? That the way that people are putting forward best practices nowadays is to reproduce the problems that the pedagogy of the oppressed is trying to diagnose. And so for me, it's what we're seeing in the world of the kind of watered down concern for social justice is a weird form of ignoring and marginalizing and neglecting the very authors you espouse to be advocating for. So
That's great. I'm so happy you said that. I'm glad that we brought it there because I find that to be really important. And I do despise DEI and this woke cancel culture itself, only because of my inner Promethean fire sees how it can be done correctly, because obviously we all want to find that inner understanding of what justice means, the understanding of what virtue and temperance and fortitude and these things. And a lot of times we're seeing individuals wanting to go out, and this is one of my big things, is go out and protest in the streets instead of understanding how to protest within the soul and how to use these texts that are around us to be able to frame yourself in the world, because the only true change is the change within. And once I can truly stand up and be the rebellious Promethean who is willing to bring the fire to the people so that they can survive the onslaught of the gods, is to have the ability to first know I can't even hold the fire of the gods until I've formulated my vessel to be able to hold the fire within. And so that is one of the massive things that I find to be an issue, is that a lot of these people and whatever, is that we need to be able just to stand on our own 2 feet and be able to put a fucking sentence together that actually makes sense, instead of trying to then protest oligarchic parasitical billionaires who don't give 2 fucks about you. And what the thing is most of the time they're the ones funding your protests. But what they're not funding is your ability to sit at home and do your own practices and formulate the temple of the soul. So then once it is actually time for you to stand up amongst your friends, your family, your loved ones, or what I'm trying to get at is your own thoughts are the ones that are deceiving you. The great deceiver is the ego thinker that deceives you the most. And then once we have the ability to bring the fire to our own self and alchemize our own thing, then we can actually have good conversations in the world. I don't know what you think about that. But
You have no idea. As an educator and as a mother, right? As a friend, like as a person who has cared about the marginalized and diversity as a value, as a real, it's been part of my pedagogical practices since forever, right? Which is, trying to uplift those who have been, historically, culturally, socially made to feel like they don't count, right? And, I know that it comes from that little girl who used to eat sandwiches in a bathroom. Used to be too afraid to speak. I mean, if you can believe this, I used to be afraid to say anything at all. Don't talk to me. And like one of the things that when I see this culture that we're living in, where, we're promoting a culture where we tell kids over and over and over again that, oh, you're the scrolling generation. You don't matter. You're rotting your brain. Go back to those techno-feudalists that you were talking about, right? The kinds of people who benefit from you thinking you don't need to read a Plato because he's a bad white guy. So you know, like that, this Western tradition, it's a monolith of oppressive ideas.
Yeah,
and it's patriarchal, and it is sometimes,
of course.
right? Because there's always going to be part of the zeitgeist, so that Plato is fighting patriarchs. He is fighting people like Alcibiades.
He is.
He is. Socrates is pushing back against, his friends who think Xanthopy is a shrew. He's like, well, she's pretty challenging to me, and that's why I like her, is basically what he says back. Socrates loved the dance, loved to come home and tussle, because that's much more interesting than having the wife that you veil and you seclude. And, we have all of these figures in the history of philosophy, be it your Ficino, your Abelards, your goodness, all of them, right? Like that all whisper, your Rumis, your Procluses, who are all whispering this kind of wisdom of finding your own power, right? That this, as Socrates says in the Alcibiades one, is the true dunamis. And I teach a class called Critics of Democracy, and I'm not really criticizing democracy, because I believe, like Plato, in the value of polity, of coming together as communities that are kin. That's what he says, that can live in harmony, that I can see that, look, you might not be interested in doing philosophy, as intensely as I do, but man, you're expressing divine wisdom in that temple you just built, right? That we have different skills. And I think that's a mad great skill. You're making sure that those symbols last infinitely longer than my little writings over here. Because here I'm not looking down on the craftsperson. I'm recognizing that they too have a vocation, and they too respect my vocation, because I help wake them up to other mysteries that will help them carve out other things into those statues and animate them properly. And so, one of the things that I always say is, who benefits from you thinking that education should be job prep, i.e. it's useless or problematic, if you have to take a class that makes you, engage with old dead white guys, or as if it's only dead white guys. It's like, no, there's plenty of professors out there who are teaching the history of philosophy and integrating your Eloises and integrating your diodemas and integrating your Asclepigenias, and knowing that's a process of, teaching to transgress, to actually provide transgressive spaces that challenge both white, Black, Latino, Chinese, to remember that their real superpower is to wake up to how those in charge benefit from us thinking that each other is the enemy.
Yes,
right?
Thank you.
That we are not able to be friends because I live in a log cabin. And it's like, no. I'm at the most a petite bourgeoisie. The real problem is the bourgeoisie, the techno-feudalists. What we need to do is to recognize that there's an education out there that allows us to heal ourselves, but also to have relationships with people who are completely different. That bell hooks, right? An author, Black feminist author of the 21st century, who talks about teaching to progress and Ain't I a Woman and all about love, can speak to Plato, and that we can show, look, not even time, not even 2,500 years can stop them from having a conversation. Why should it be the same between a young kid who believes X, Y, or Z about philosophy, who thinks that they already know it all? I promise, right? There's a magic that can even traverse this divide between you and I. Yeah, there's a magic. I will never understand what it's like to be an enslaved person, right? Never. But I can sympathize. I can read bell hooks' account of the Black female slave experience and bring it into my soul. Always hear it whispering to me when I think about how people are divided by certain kinds of patriarchs that just want to make money and don't give a crap about human dignity, especially in women.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think it's beautiful is that we also don't have a great understanding of what individual souls need for their own levels of enlightenment in time frame. And why I bring in the stories of science fiction, fantasy, comic books, and anime is that how do you create a superhero? Well, you do it through the hero's journey, obviously, but it's the great suffering of the world, the of dharma, of samsara. We must suffer so that we can then understand how to pass on the levels of existence to be able to transcend our current understanding of us in this great cosmos of the universe. And upon that suffering, no matter what kind it is, that then you can transmute that and become the greatest version of yourself, no matter where you are on this planet. And I think that is a human issue and a human problem that is actually a great problem for us all to have. And I'm not saying each individual needs to suffer in the worst of all possible places as they are in the Middle East or in these small little countries in Africa or in Europe or wherever, China. I mean, China's got some of the worst, and so it's fascinating that we always want to, again, I think this is a problem of wanting to focus on the particulars when what we need to be talking about are these universal, the forms, the good and what they are, because if we can understand then that kind of suffering and that kind of evil is a privation of the good, instead of splitting it into a dualistic understanding of the universe where now all of a sudden you have an all evil and an all good, and now they need to continually be battling, which sounds like a divine drama to me, is that we can then have the understanding that we're going to transcend dualism into this kind of unification where we can understand that it's just it's the privation of the good, and that then we cannot be a victim of circumstance anymore, and we can actually stand up for ourselves.
Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, cut from the same cloth, I would say, because there are shared things. This is, again, to go back to Platonism, the problem of participation. No, you and I participate, right? We sometimes feel as if we're alone. And one of the things that philosophy does is allow us to say, look, even the person that I thought was my mortal enemy, I can bridge that with the power of my words or my paintings or my empathy, my willingness to say, I don't know what you've experienced, but I'm here listening to the logos, right? Because I want to bring it in and make it part of my story. And that here, that's because we share. That's just a brute fact. We share a reality. What that reality is, I'm not 100% sure. We can both engage it. We can both talk about it. We can both disagree and debate and fight even about it without ruining our friendship. Because that's the given, right? Is that's what real friendship is challenging each other to get out of the darkness, get out of the cave of our own egos, which benefit us or benefit the techno-feudalist if we stay trapped in ego world, stay trapped in the solipsism, stay trapped in all there is death and taxes. Because, nothing between. I can't ever actually connect with anybody. We're split apart, as Aristophanes would say. No chance of healing. No, begin. You are already healed. You are already connected with others. And how are you going to sustain the good of that? Because yes, there are shared values, but if Platonism is correct, it means those universals that we're tapping into, that we live, like justice. We're both looking to it. But since we're each unique, we're each a one, idiotos, so that here we're little idiots. In Greek, idiots means, singularities. But that we don't think of our singularity as a problem, but our unique vantage point that we'll understand. Yes, if I sat across the table from bell hooks, we would have a very different conception of justice. But that's why we're listening to each other, is to learn to share it as much as possible. And that's part of the process of creating communities, right? So that in my democracy class, it's like, do we have a community? Do we have the resources to actually say, we the people, right? We believe in the good, the true, and the just, which means we're going to commit ourselves to creating an educational system that allows people to believe in those things, even when they disagree as a community. That, no, I'm still willing to ride and die for the concept of justice, because I know it's something, right? I might not be the best philosopher, but we have an education that helps me realize that those rulers are actually people who also care about maintaining harmony, even in difference. And that's what it means to be a real warrior, is not being drafted and forced because you need a paycheck. But no, you are defending the good of every person, right, in your city, your state, your nation, and you sorry to God, this guy, I can't believe I'm about to quote him, are like Braveheart, you know, ready, like, I want my freedom, because freedom is not a right to be given. It's something that we as a people find within. It's a miracle, according to Plato, that it happens in a democratic, patriarchal world where everybody is taught to just go after pleasure. But sometimes those spirits, right, that help actually show that we are connected to each other in our differences and our unique, neurodiverse, crazy, wackadoo ways of being, right? That we can, touch each other's soul. We can light up that spirit in your soul. And there's another point that I want to emphasize here. Yeah, and it benefits the techno-feudalist for us to think that the only way to be good is to vote for the right thing and to have the right political view. And if you don't have the right political view, then you become like Socrates, put on trial for your life for corrupting the youth. Versus, no, like, I don't want the easy manufactured virtue of voting to be what virtue is, right? Like, sure, yeah, I'm a good person. I voted today. Put it on my sticker on my hat, and now everybody knows I'm a good person.
Yeah, no. Peacocking mentality.
Yeah, like I volunteered for the army versus no, I'm ready, even though I don't know how to shoot a gun, to live and die for the kind of education that makes it possible that any two people, regardless of their political views, can see that what really matters is to become kin, to create abodes, to create communities that are in love with the human being.
Yeah, nice. I completely love that. And I think that's something that's leading us into what I want to get to. But it's so true. And it's that relationship between beloved and beloved. And this is that relationship that we're creating with everything that is, because it goes back to what you're saying is if everything is beingness, or from the magical worldview perspective, which means that everything has an embodied virtue in and of itself, that when I interact with something, it is me interacting with another version of me, if it's a person, or when I pick something up, that I'm interacting with this daemon that has its own thing to give me, no matter if it's the cup, the chair, the trees. But it's, and I don't really care for the idea, all the ideals of animism and the different things. But the reason I have troubles with that, just like the reasons I have troubles with staying within a patriarchy or a matriarchy, I don't like that. I think we have to move forward. And that's a way of viewing of like, I want to get out of the longhouse. I don't want to go back to these things. I don't want to go back to paganism. I'm not looking to go back to the Abrahamic traditions. I think it's about creating something new. And as William Blake talked about, it's like you must create your own system or be enslaved by another man's, but understand as we do so, it has to be a hybridization of the systems that once came before it. Thus, we can move forward and take all the knowledge that once was, and then hopefully build up this new thing as the old world dies.
So that's absolutely essential, because you think about what I was talking about at the very beginning of our conversation, the syncretic nature of all of these people who are living kind of refugee lives in the Mediterranean, just in order to survive and trying to keep their religions and faiths and wisdoms alive, right? And again, I'm sorry to use this same quote, but who benefits when we think that my internalizing the value of Tantra, right, into my daily practices is appropriation, right? So that it's like, no, like this is part of the culture of recognizing that we can enter into worlds that are not completely our own. And as Maria Lugana says, we can become fluent in those worlds, and to know that we aren't going to be exactly like the past, just like Parmenides and Alea or Socrates in Athens knows that his version of his mother's wisdom is a little different, just like Plato is doing something a little different than Socrates, because they've internalized it, and then they saw their own power to recreate a new world. And so, like, if we wanted, there's no going back to...
No going back, I agree.
What colonial means, right, is not, oh, now colonialism is over and everything needs to go back exactly. No, it means that we have to respond to colonization. We have to create things that acknowledge, we can't ignore the atrocities that happened to Black men and women on this soil, or the atrocities that are happening to people of color right now. As Sartre would say, we have to be responsible even for things that we did not do, because what responsibility means is to respond, right? But let's respond in ways, right, that show the value of the human spirit, that we can be syncretic, that we can go in and out of each other's worlds, and that not be deceit or fake or using, right? That there is a genuine way, as Lugonis would say, to travel into people's world that shows deference. One of the things that she says is have the willingness to be a fool, to get it wrong, right? Like, like when I, try to speak Spanish and I do it wrong, right? And then my friend's like, chica, that's not right. It's like, oh, lo siento. That willingness that you are going to be called out, that somebody's going to say, that's not appropriate in my culture. And I internalize that so that I know that when I'm at this person's house, take my shoes off. It shows respect. It shows deference. And you know what? Maybe I'm going to start doing that in my house too, because I see the value of the little things like that. They become part of me. Just like on December 6th, because I lived in Belgium, I celebrate Sinterklaas because it's now part of who I am, because I recognize the value of internalizing and reproducing cultures, because that's how they stay alive.
Otherwise they will die. No, and we are in a melting pot society, and that's what America is being born as. The new Atlantis was built to actually do, was to be a melting pot of all things. And I personally don't believe in the history that we're fed almost at all. So I know that even maybe before the Native Americans, I think there has been history on this continent pre that, and vast amounts of civilizations that have grown up. I personally don't believe in the out of Africa theory. Again, if people can, come at me, and that's fine. But the idea is that if we're starting to see things like Göbekli Tepe, and we're starting to understand what are these Anunnaki or the Mesopotamian Sumerian mythoses that they're trying to put by, how does civilization just build up itself out of nothingness or nowhere? What are these stellar cults, these stellar religions that were going on pre-13,000 years ago? And then you're going to try to tell me that, no, we come from monkeys out of Africa and there's a direct through line, but all of a sudden this one thing is missing. I start to question that. And there's something that I thought of it multiple times as we were talking, and Terence McKenna talked about it, and he says it's the idea of the Big Bang Theory in comparison to the creation myths, is that the Big Bang Theory is the same thing as the Genesis myth, and it says, give me one great myth, here it is, give me one great miracle and I'll fill in the rest. And that is the Big Bang. It's like, how that doesn't make any fucking sense. Just like it doesn't make any sense to view the literal interpretation of the Bible as exactly everything only started 6,000 years ago. If we can understand it through the metaphor, the myth, the allegory, and the symbolism that are the great sages, mystics, and philosophers as our past, all the way through up to today, and that they're holding this thing for us, and they're saying, if you can tap into your nervous system through these things, if you can tap into your soul, you can start to decode the very nature of existence itself, which is that we are a civilization with amnesia, and that you can have your own form of apotheosis, that you can reach the harmony of the spheres, that you can tap into the forms, and you can be your own philosopher king. That is something I'm trying to tell everybody, and no one can hold you down. And again, people may hate this, but the idea that is you are victimizing yourself, the great you. All of us out there, even no matter what kind of great atrocities you've been through, right? We all have obviously been victimized in one way or another, but I think we got to throw that away and realize that you don't need to be a coward, that we can be courageous in the face of darkness, and that darkness most of the time is the games that we play in our own mind. Because no matter if you're Boethius trapped within, it's one of the greatest books I've ever read, Boethius's Constellation of Philosophy. He doesn't talk to God, he doesn't talk to any Apollo, he speaks to Philosophia herself. He's speaking to, and he's like, they can do all they want to me, but as long as I'm within my own heart, they can never take away that great spark of the mystery. And so that's my.
This is one of the reasons why philosophy, like somebody like Epictetus, a slave, right? Like he becomes one of the greatest philosophers, yes, inspiring somebody like Marcus Aurelius. And so that here, you know, like that's the beauty of it, is that we discover that all the trauma, all the pain, all the hurt, you think it's such a, you know, homunculus, a beast, and you don't even have to slay it, right? Like you could. I love this image in Das Buch Zarathustra where Servius is supposedly growling, and then Nietzsche through Zarathustra says, and then it barked. It's a puppy, right? Yes, it benefits a lot of people for you to think that you are always going to be in the well of despair.
Yeah.
But I promise you, there are traditions that once you merge them and marry them with your soul, right, they can make all of those things new secrets for you to whisper with regards to how it is that you bring about something good and beautiful and true and just. And that we can be part of communities that have friends that believe and support and empower each other to say, look, that story about Atlantis is crazy what I could do, but tell me more. That stuff about Anunnaki, that's a little woo-woo, but tell me more. Because that was, even if it's not real, it's still fucking cool to think about. And like, let's stop with this whole, but that's not true. Well, fine. You know, it's not necessarily true that I'm a bag of mostly water. I'm also a thinking being that has participated in the history of ideas and philosophy and talks to the dead when she goes to library stacks. It's true that I'm a bag of mostly water, but as Nietzsche would say, I have more taste for the second thing I said, right? I prefer the person who goes through stacks and who can imagine that impossible worlds can be made possible if we have teams and polities that work with each other. And that even if I were alone and nobody were able to really have ears to hear, that I'm so proud of this relationship with the daimon, with the God, with the more than, that has lit the fire of the brave heart in my soul, that I know, as Nietzsche would say, if that buzz comes, I'm going to say, yes, let's do it again. And so,
yeah. Oh, that's good. I love that. Okay, nice. And fascinating enough how we've been moving through the different levels of history and philosophy and kind of reaching up into, this is all your wheelhouse. I think we've been talking about Plato this whole time, not even to talk about when we reach actually Platonic philosophy, because I think we're going to leave that for next time. We're going to leave a little inkling for the mystery and the detective narrative of what's going to come next between you and I as we work through this continual conversation. But I do really find it fascinating, this new thing that you're doing. I don't know how new it is. Please talk to me about Palinode Productions and what you're trying to do, because it sounds fucking awesome.
Yeah, so Palinode Productions, the title of the company comes from Plato's Phaedrus, where Socrates is kind of forced by Phaedrus to give a speech about love that he doesn't believe in, right? And as they're crossing a river, he realizes that he's transgressed against Eros, right? Transgressed against the god of love. And so he says, look, I've got to do a recantation speech, a palinode. I've got to talk differently about this thing called Eros. And so when I was thinking about the name for our company, and we came up with some really lousy, almost silly ones.
It's so hard to come up with names.
Philosophy Horrors was one of them. Every now and again, I still get a letter for Philosophy Horrors. I'm like, oh God. But in any case, the point is that that Palinode is that kind of, let's think differently about what we think philosophy is, what we think love is, what we think AI is, what we think media is, that for a Platonist, nothing is either good nor bad in and of itself. This is why that 18-year-old kid can create a meme, because I don't think memes are bad. I don't think TikTok is ruining young people's brains. I think that we have to think differently about the kind of content and the kind of social media platforms and search engines, the way that tech is being developed. It's being developed by people who their very goal is to create audiences that stay in their demographic, stay in their lane, right? So that if you like cat videos, you're just going to keep getting cat videos, right? If you are on the right, you're going to keep getting all that stuff on the right, right? And so because it benefits and it makes capital for people, for you to stay and be predictable. And I thought, oh, what happens? Because I had already started Palinode by then, trying to create media that does this work of challenging people to create, podcasts and memes and GIFs that stimulate the philosophical life. But I realized, oh, wait, these algorithms, they're not tuned to this, because to think differently and to be living a kind of life that is always committed to thinking differently, well, that would be a problem for a lot of the social media. That would be the anomalous kind of, I can't put this in a box. I can't sell to this person. I can't actually get data that would actually allow me to figure out how to make them complacent to the systems that be. And so that's when we started developing what's called the Khora platform, which currently is right now a philosophical database that looks like a nebulous star system where you connect ideas and things like this. But within the next few weeks, we're going to be rolling out features that make it more like a social media platform where people can, read an article on Ficino, and you know what? I didn't get it all because, nobody gets it all. But Ficino really made me understand the value of artistry and artisanal work. And so I'm not going to make this table just because I'm forced to by the man to make this table. I'm going to make this table that reflects, love and astrology and tarot and whatnot. And I'm going to take a picture of it. And I'm going to put it on Khora. I'm going to connect. So it's not going to be about liking or disliking, or that it's going to be about connecting the things that inspire you to what inspired you to be the creator of new values, the creator of the table, the creator of the philosophical speech, the creator of the podcast, right? That here we're putting things in that show that we're connected to one another, so that even if you put in something generated by AI in Khora, that's the first thing it's going to do is explode with connections to what it was actually made by, so that you see and that way you can see the difference. So that even when I put in one of my original works of art, you'll see that it was influenced by Botticelli, it was influenced by Frida Kahlo, and so that here we can make a better decision about what is truly human ingenuity versus machines. And again, I'm not putting down the machines, right? Because I think nothing is good, neither good nor bad in itself. It's how we create them. Do we create them with the telos or the purpose of seeing the beauty, the true, and the good in things? Or do we create them to make people feel like commodities themselves, to make people feel like a mere demographic, to make people feel like all they can do is purchase their identity in IKEA magazine? So
yeah, that's great. So then so is this something that people are going to be able to use themselves? They're going to be able to go to Palinode or go to Khora? It's already public. Okay.
So on Palinode, you can go to our Substack and you can see all the media we're creating. We have a Discord where we're trying to get people to also see that this is not about, one company going big. It's about creating small pockets of a Renaissance mentality that we, as communities of changers, we can come on MagusintheMedia and go, whoa, Magus is awesome. We can go on to Occult Rejects. We can go on Ike Baker and so on and so forth. That we all are part of creating this web, because, that was the thing I wanted to say is that, I disagree with you about melting pot. I actually believe in the value of thinking of it as a tapestry, that we each are a string in this beautiful Penelope's kind of coming home for Odysseus blanket, and that we can create that place that comforts us and brings us home together, as we each have our own little thread, or golden thread, as you said, Socrates says in the Ion, a place. And so it's about creating networks of other communities and people and individuals. So on Palinode, please share your stuff. Ask to be published on it. Ask me to reproduce, your stuff as well, so on and so forth. But then on Khora, right, that is the social media platform where we are going to see those connections. We're going to see. So right now, it's populated with thousands of philosophical, spiritual text, from,
Cool.
Plato's Republic to my articles to hopefully you'll ask me to put your works in it, to the Confucianism, to obscure Native American traditions and their understanding of the nature of reality, so that when you go on and you type in what is the meaning of life, you see that goddess Quatalique, right? It's right there, right? It's not buried on page 7 when you're thinking about the fierceness of the divine 7. It's right there in a constellation. That's what it looks like. It looks like a constellation of ideas, and that you see Quatalique and Artemis can be found on the very same map of fierce, amazing, divine snake goddesses.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I will state that we still do agree. I like the tapestry motif. And sometimes I speak really quickly, like yourself, probably. And I get that idea. And the more I think about the melting pot theory, I don't even really like it myself, because it's like, I want people, I believe, I'm an existentialist at heart. I believe in the individual as being able to stand out even in amongst others, and that we can yin and yang ourselves back and forth. And so we merge together and then we separate. That's the true alchemical burner as we're trying to become better.
But here's the Epicurean in me, I like my pot of cheese too. I like my little melting pot too.
Yeah, see, that's beautiful. And that's how we spar back and forth to be able to find that true center, and go back to the idea of what even truth itself. We're trying to change the idea of even what that means, because instead of this noun that I pick up and hold, it becomes what Parmenides talks about with aletheia. It is an unconcealedness. Truth is unconcealed to you, and it goes back to why I like Heidegger so much, is that he spoke about it in his own works about how we must walk ourselves out into the clearing. And once we move ourselves into the clearing, the sun can shine itself upon that thing which we're trying to have revealed to us. And then truth unconceals itself. Instead of it being this noun, it becomes a process and a verb as it does, so that it's an experience of the mystery itself, which is, I think, the whole roundabout of everything we're talking about, is that with philosophy, we become true adepts of wonder and wondrousness of the mystery itself.
No, beautiful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. We're going to continue this conversation probably for the rest of your and Maya's life, because we don't get to as much as I talk to a lot of people, I feel like there's a special bond of philosophers as we move through this world. And the only thing that I think, one of the only things, and I have my own faults for speaking in absolutes, which I'm working on, it's a continual process, but I think philosophy is one of those things that can save us. So Danielle, please tell the people where they can find you on all the things.
Yeah, so Palinode Productions .com, Khora.world for Khora. We have a Substack, which is type in Palinode there. We have a Discord, which also, if you go to palinodeproductions.com, you're going to get all the links to all the things, including the Substack, including Discord. We're actively looking for people who are rogue social media people, so that we're looking for ways to utilize social media to promote Khora and Palinode, but in ways that disrupt the standard ways of just paid advertisement and inundating and making people feel like they have to do things or have to so if you got any ideas about that, hop on the Discord and let us know, and or join the community. And so
that's beautiful. And I think, I've got some ideas on this rogue Ronin-ness of what we're doing around here. So I think it's really important. Yeah, everybody, please go over to everything that Danielle does. She's a light in the sea of darkness as we go upon this strange and chaotic world. And I think it's really important so we understand that the chaos is not going up against that of order, but they tend to merge themselves in all that we do. So we must tap into that chaotic energy in the world, and we must move with purpose.
Heidegger, chaos is a yawning or a gaping. It's a clearing. It is a place where the sun can shine. It is the nooks, the darkness that allows the stars to twinkle.
Oh, that's beautiful. I can't even say it much better than that. So that was amazing. Thank you, Danielle, for such an amazing conversation.
No, thank you. You're a true gift. So thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Everybody out there in the world, make sure to like, subscribe, and share on this strange algorithmic archonic journey that we are in. It truly helps us all. And the only way to battle these great archons, the great parasitic oligarchical demon class, is to make sure that you stand in your own journey, tall and proud as you reach towards those philosophical field of forms so we can become our own philosopher king queens in this great journey. I have had a great time. We're going to continue doing this. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, everybody out there. And until next time, goodbye.